that shit up.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Zakiya Luna. I am a co-editor of the Black Feminist Sociology edited volume. I want to thank you all for being here for our event featuring many of our authors from our text, remembering and honoring Bell Hooks' legacy, feminism, sociology, and beyond. Feel free to let folks know where you are zooming in from. I, right now, am zooming in from Ohlone Land, and we have 5 great guests today who are going to talk a bit before we open it up to the rest of you. I know this is a really hectic time for many people in the year, whether you're on the academic schedule or not. So we just really want to thank people for being here to honor Bell Hooks, who impacted so many of us in so many different ways. We will put links to the bios of our wonderful esteemed speakers. You can check them out on the Black Feminist Sociology website and learn more about them and the text and the different work that they are doing beyond this Zoom room. But we know time is precious, and we wanted to kick things off. Again, wherever you are zooming in from, we had about 200 people registered from throughout the US and beyond, and just want to acknowledge our ancestors whose land we are on, whether it's Ohlone land or some of you zooming in from the Confederacy of the Odawa people or the Chumash people or wherever you are at. And always remembering the work that they have done to steward the land and the work that they continue to do. We are recording this event and we will post it at some point in the next couple weeks on the BFS website. Each speaker will introduce themselves. They are spotlighted. They should be spotlighted for you. We have Dr. Assata Richards, Dr. Jen James, Dr. Carolette Norwood, Dr. LeConté Dill, and Ashley Garner. And I was just going to say a few words about sort of why I wanted to do this event. I mean, on one hand, it's sort of obvious, like, of course, we want to honor Bell Hooks in any way possible. I had just finished actually a meeting with the BFS team when I went on Twitter and I saw Bell Hooks trending. And when you see someone's name trending, someone like Bell Hooks, oh, wait a second, what's going on? And then kept seeing the hashtags rest in power. And I think like many folks, there's been different ways that she has impacted me in my life. And I've been writing up something, and I think of her as one of the like 2 or 3 Black feminists in my life besides my mom, who I can't remember what like my life was like before I'd been introduced to her. And I do remember being at a bookstore on Telegraph Avenue, which was, we used to go to bookstores in Telegraph. I was in high school, and I remember my mom buying me 2 items. One was Bitch magazine, which at the time was a little zine, it was a little square, and it was issue number 2. And she bought me a Bell Hooks book. And I always remember that it was a Bell Hooks book because I looked at the cover and it was purple. And I asked my mom, I was like, why is her name lowercase? And then my mom explained. And that was sort of the start of Bell Hooks being in my life in so many different ways, personally and academically. And when I heard the news, I went over to my bookshelf and started looking at my Bell Hooks books, and I just kept on moving to different parts of the shelves, like, because I have my stuff by subject area, and it was pedagogy, it was feminism, it was love and relationships, it was writing processes. And by the end of those few minutes, I had 12 books stacked up. And to me, that's what I mean by like, she's been such a part of my life, and she's probably the person whose texts I have the most of. Um, and that speaks, I think, so much to how broad ranging her writing and thinking was, and why so many people were so affected by her. And I sort of always associate bell hooks with my mom, if she rests in peace, both of them, and the many sort of insights and lessons learned from someone who was really committed to what Buddhists call right speech, and thinking about sort of life off the mat, as Buddhists call it, sort of in practice. And I think that bell hooks as an academic was always someone who was saying, like, what are we doing beyond our classroom spaces, as revolutionary as they are? What are we doing in the beauty shops, when we're raising children, when we're doing all of these things? So I really want to thank my co-editor Whitney and our digital editor Melissa Brown, who then Thursday morning, when I was like, I think let's put something together. I mean, I know everyone's grading and doing a whole bunch of stuff, but let's see what happens. Maybe some of the BFS folks will be interested. And it was just wonderful to send out an email that afternoon, and literally people started answering minutes later. So that's who you're going to be hearing from shortly. And folks are going to talk a little bit about sort of how they met bell hooks, and sort of how she influenced their work. And then we're going to do a little bit more round robin style, and then just open it up to folks. And as we're going, feel free to, add your favorite chat. People are putting in other things regarding other ways and other events, etc., in the chat as well. So I think first, Professor Dill is going to talk a little bit. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's good to hold space. It's good to have a space to hold space in this moment of mourning and of remembering and of honoring. I see dear mentors in this space of mine, students and mentees, family members, and including my mama, friends and comrades, and others that I don't know, but we're holding the space together. I just want to open it up that, emotions might come, and that's, I think, okay in this moment and who we are in the practice of Black feminism. So my tissues are here just in case. My students know I keep them by my desk. My water is here, right? Lubrication and libation. And I'm going to be breathing throughout as I'm talking and listening. The first question is, how did I come to know Bell? And then also, how has she influenced my work? And I don't have an exact event or date, but I would say I met Bell somewhere between the ages of 15 and 25. And it was in one or two or three spaces. One, my mother, who I again said is in the Zoom space, Deborah Sterling, she waved earlier. She always had Black feminist texts on her bookshelf. And although I wouldn't say we were engaged in deep study, like she wasn't telling me, you read this, but whenever I was looking for a book and looking to counter the white stream canon of my middle school and high school, I had anthologies of poetry and fiction and memoir and socio-political texts and art on our walls. So I might have met her as a teenager in my bookshelf in my home. If not, then probably most definitely at Spelman College, my alma mater, which I write about in the Black Feminist Sociology anthology with co-authors. We're also Spelmanites. I wasn't a women's studies major, but Black feminisms were and are everywhere at Spelman, regardless of your major. And if we weren't reading them in our various classrooms, then folks were coming to campus to guest lecture. Shout out to Dr. Beverly Guy Shefdahl and other radical scholars and educators at Spelman who were committed to keeping Black feminisms everywhere. And if I didn't meet Bell in the classroom or in spaces at Spelman, then I definitely probably met her in the Bay Area, where I spent my 20s and early 30s and was immersed in the creative writing scene in the Bay and the social justice community organizing scene. But also I had Black feminist therapists. And so I feel like I was nurtured by other writers who were encouraging and demanding that we read Bell. And she influences my pedagogy, definitely. I specifically cite her in my syllabus, in my teaching statement, and often in my first slides during like the first day of class, no matter what my class is. Some of my students are here. I'm trained in public health, so even in public health, we're citing bell hooks, particularly because she reminds us of the classroom as a radical activist space. She reminds us to disrupt, to transgress. And importantly, she reminds us that our students are our co-learners. And oftentimes I've felt alone in amplifying students as co-learners. I'm thankful to be at a space now in the Department of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University, where we center Black feminisms and center Black feminist praxis, including co-learning with our students. So definitely my pedagogy and my praxis as an educator. Thank you for this offering.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, just I guess depending on where you are. Again, my name is Ashley Garner. I'm a graduate student at Massachusetts-Amherst. And speaking of moms, mine is here, so I just want to give her a shout out too. Thanks for logging on, Mom. So I was lucky enough to meet bell hooks my freshman year in college. I lived in a social justice living learning community, which was overseen by the poet Cheryl Clark and one of her graduate students, Anahi Garrido at the time. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Cheryl Clark's writing. And so you know that there was no way that we were going a moment, let alone a semester and a full year without reading hooks. And so I struggled a lot the first year of college, especially. My work was mostly fine, but my attendance was really middling. I hadn't like really understood school as anything at that point more meaningful than getting good grades, because that's what you were supposed to do. And I think that hooks would say that my mind and body were absolutely still split. And I remember Anahi asking me to follow her back to her office one afternoon. And I was really nervous because I was sure that I was in trouble or whatever that could mean in a college course. And instead, what she handed me three books. She handed me This Bridge Called My Back, Borderlands La Frontera, and Teaching to Transgress. All works that prior to that point I had not heard of, but that had continued to greatly influence the rest of my college years. And in that conversation, Anahi acknowledged my clear struggle, right? I expected shaming, I expected scolding and scorn, and she did all of that without shame. And she said something to the effect of like, sometimes we all need help finding purpose and someone to believe in us. And so I tell this story because even though we were reading hooks, it was the first time I had really experienced someone leading with the type of love that characterized Hooks's writing. It made what initially read to me as an idealism real. It was a concrete living politics that could be enacted and inhabited even in really small ways. So that was incredibly meaningful to me. That same year, in an intro to women's studies class, we read a bell hooks essay and were asked to write a reflection that concluded with one lingering question that you still have from the reading. And I don't remember the exact essay, but I do remember my question, kind of echoing Dr. Luna earlier, right? Why is bell hooks' name all lowercase? And that wasn't me trying to be flippant. It was literally my only lingering question, right? Like outside of fiction, I don't think that I had read much of anything, but especially not theory, that was just so clear and precise in its message. Her work felt and still feels to me like a conversation with a loved one who isn't afraid to challenge you, but they do so with grace, and they continue to check in and reiterate and make sure you got the message because it's significant. And her influence in my work, first of all, the fact that I did not apply to graduate school thinking I was going to study religion, and I thought I knew that the field thought it was unserious. And so I think that the initial influence is really just, I mean, Bell Hooks really embodied her spirituality and did not shy away from that. And so that's just off the top. But my essay in BFS was called Black Feminist Piety, or I guess it's called, and it explores what an axis of religion embedded within Black feminist sociology would look like in an offer. But much more broadly than that, I at least understand my essay is asking, what does it mean to inhabit liminal space? What are the sort of social and political transformations that become possible from a space of liminality? Who has the greatest capacity for reimagining the largely unjust structures that shape our lives? And finally, how will we as sociologists and academics recognize a reimagining when we see it if theoretical convention primes us to stop at a lot of those sort of taken for granted conclusions that can sometimes overdetermine our writing, at least my own, I know. For instance, like I said earlier, I accepted the incompatibility of Islam and feminism, or just doing serious academic work, or that religion should matter when examining racialization. Right. In Hooks's book on feminist theory, she writes about liminality. It's all over her work. I mean, she wrote, living as we, I'm quoting her now, living as we did on the edge, we developed a particular way of seeing reality. We looked both from the outside in and from the inside out. We focused attention to the center as well as on the margin. We understood both. For me, the particular way of seeing reality, as she said it, bred at the margins is that ability to disavow a system of exploitation. It's the ability to critique the origins of a particular radical movement, the way that she did so explicitly with feminism, right? Without disavowing individuals. It means challenging the brand of like liberalism or liberal politics that we have now that says that some of us are without redemption. We're necessarily deplorable. There's no hope for us. And Hooks influences me and my personal political mission the most greatly on this point. Through her work, I'm reminded that the spaces that we have to come together with other folks of our shared identities, where you can laugh and yell and scheme and write critical theory, are critical. But at the same time, and at the same time, we need to movement build beyond those communities and create solidarities widely for love of ourselves and, of each other.
I think I'm next. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen James. I'm an assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you right now. This loss hit, like coming at the end of 2021. I feel like I felt this, and I'm feeling this now very much in my body. And I'm just grateful for this community. And I didn't know Dr. Gloria Jean Watkins and the way that so many others were privileged to know her, but it's interesting how much I feel like I knew Bell Hooks, and really more than that, how much I feel like Bell Hooks knew me, got me and my struggles, and how much I saw my own experiences and my own struggles, reflected in her writing on this really deep level. And I was not fortunate enough to grow up in a house where there were Bell Hooks books on the shelf. I'm just like so amazed by that, although I shouldn't be. I have children growing up in my house where there's many of them on the shelf now. And I think like many, I came to her work in college. And it was transformational for me. Learning Black feminism was transformational. It helped me make sense of so much about my life and about how I approached the world and wanted to approach the world. And Bell Hooks was so central to that. I think many have spoken already about the way that she inspired teaching and pedagogy, and I'm the same way. Bell Hooks is in every teaching statement, and is at the forefront of lectures and classes that I do. The way I work with students, the way I see the role of the academy and the role of the classroom. And it really helped me make sense of things that did not work for me in my own educational experience, to see the things that were not right and to see what the power of the revolutionary power of education can be. But most of my work is really as a researcher. And I feel like Bell Hooks really inspired my whole course of research. In my early days of graduate school, I think I felt the imposter syndrome that so many of us do. I felt like I couldn't really hack it. Like so much of the theory that I read felt so abstract. It felt so distant to my life and my experience and my work. And Bell Hooks felt helped everything, it felt more grounded. It reflected my own lived experience. It challenged me to do certain types of research. It allowed me to feel like I was building off of a tradition of just this really beautiful foundational work in the area I wanted to study. I think, mirroring Ashley's comments, like feeling like what I wanted to study wasn't really valid. It wasn't what I was supposed to do. It would look down upon, and help me to see that that wasn't the case, to find a way to sort of belong in the academy without fully being of the academy. My chapter in the Black Feminist Sociology text is a methods chapter. It's from my dissertation research, although I've continued to use it now that I'm many years past that. And when I was working towards my dissertation, as I was doing my qualifying exams, I think I cited like 7 bell hooks texts in my qualifying exams. When I did my dissertation proposal, I remember that I had this quote, I said, I take seriously bell Hooks's critique. Oh, somebody's screen sharing. I don't think it's me. So the idea that research should belong to the people from whom we collect data is not a normal idea. The idea that we should write for really broad audiences is like totally discounted and not what we think about. The idea that research should be collected in partnership and in community, and that knowledge is built communally, is like just mind-blowing in this setting. And bell hooks, I feel like, gave me the tools to explain what motivated my work and how I was going to do that work and why it was important. And I think has given me the confidence to speak back to people who tried to encourage me to go in other directions, who told me, no, you can only study Black women in comparison to white people, who've said, you can't do community engaged research. It doesn't get funded. It's not real. It's not rigorous. And I feel like I owe that to bell hooks. I also just want to note how important I think bell hooks has been to me personally. When my partner and I got married, we were really both very ambivalent about the institution of marriage. And it was sort of, we needed to protect our family in all these ways, and we did it. But we ended up having bell hooks be really central for our ceremony. As we were sort of describing the love we wanted to have, we quoted bell hooks. We talked about using love as a verb, about love being a mix of care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. So I think her work on love has informed so many. But I think what to me is one of her most radical interventions around love is around self-love. And I'm a person who has not easily loved myself. And learning from bell hooks that as a Black woman, loving myself is a radical political act really offers a permission and a charge to do so. It's something I struggle with every single day. And as I've been returning to her work over this last week, as I'm sure so many of us have been doing, I've been struck by how much she still has to teach me around this now, and sort of the gift of her insight and her brilliance that lives on in this moment, especially I think for me around community and around healing. Despite my commitment to community in my scholarship, I feel like I have not always been good about being in community as a person. As sort of like a nerdy, awkward kid who wants to be alone with my books. Like, it's always been, I'm used to sort of just working things out in my head. And over the course of the pandemic, it's just the loss and the grief and the isolation and the noise, it just continues to mount. And it felt hard to overcome. And I felt like I can't really do it all. I can't do the kids, and I can't do the academy and all the things we're supposed to do. And how quickly I end up blaming myself and seeing myself as the problem, that I'm struggling, and it's my fault, and not that we're like in the middle of a freaking pandemic. And just the way in which like that is white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal values, like that's what it does. And revisiting bell hooks and just reading some of her words, rarely if ever are any of us healed in isolation, and just that healing is an act of communion has been so important to me. To like, the academy is such a hard place to be. Academy is really hard. And the pressure we put on ourselves to prove ourselves that we can do it, we can follow this like white patriarchal model of what it's supposed to be. And just listening to a bell hooks lecture where she's talking about how she struggled and she had to find a way to make academia work for her. And she published 40 books, but she found this to be a challenge. Like, it's okay that I find it to be a challenge too. And I can find ways to make it work for me like she did. And that needs to be in community. Like, being together like this is what makes academia a rich, beautiful space. So I'm just so grateful to be here in community with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you all for providing this space. I'm sorry, Dr. James, that comment about community nearly broke me. I came into my feminism alone. my mother was a feminist in action, but certainly not one who identified as a feminist. And I think that's true of many women of her generation. I'm from South Louisiana, Bayou country, and that was not a term ever used. Feminism wasn't an identity that she claimed, but it was actually something she did in practice. I believe my first encounter with hooks was in a college classroom at LSU. I believe she came to campus, and I had very few Black professors, but it was a Black English professor that invited her to the classroom. And at that moment, I didn't know who she was. It was an important visitor that I just had no concept of. It wasn't until in my master's program, we were reading this book, Outlaw Culture. And there was a chapter called Power to the Pussy. And I'm just like, yes, that she was so bold to use that language, pussy, and to say it was kind of liberating, right? Especially for someone like me coming from a very Southern background. And it wouldn't be until in my college years, in my PhD, and then actually when I started to teach, that I would rediscover hooks. I didn't realize it, but when after I finished my PhD and I went on to St. Mary's College, which was my first job, I remember doing an assignment, and I found this T-shirt where I quote hooks. It was protest T-shirts that I had the students do, and they can choose a quote that they felt inspired them. And for me, this was the one where she talks about what is a feminist movement, and the importance of ending patriarchy and the call for action, right? And so as a new professor, then at the University of Cincinnati, I came into the Africana Studies program, and I was tasked with teaching Black feminism. And it was in that course that in teaching that I would rediscover bell hooks and Beverly Guy-Sheffall and Pat Hill Collins. And for me, many of those texts were like feminist Bibles. And it was the place where I felt validated, the place where I could learn to speak out and push back, and be less afraid, and less lonely in some ways, and yet at the same time feel quite a bit of loneliness. And so that whole comment about community, how do we establish feminist communities, is still a lingering question for me. I tried to do it later on in my, maybe let's say, I don't know, 10 years into teaching, by creating a book club with students. And that worked. And colleagues. It worked for a while, but it's difficult to sustain. And so when I got this email about this, gathering, this was so comforting, because when I got the news that hooks had passed, I was alone. I was walking on the streets of DC, doing some Christmas shopping, getting prepared to come home. And a friend texted me to tell me that she had passed. And I literally doubled over. I couldn't breathe for a minute. It was, just that isolation of kind of being in mourning alone is hard. I'm not on any of the social media, so I didn't see all of what was happening. And so I at some point when we're engaged with the audience, I would love to hear other people talk about ways that we can continue the work of conscious raising, and how do we find feminist communities. Bell Hooks influenced my research tremendously. One of my favorite papers to date is a paper I wrote on decolonizing my hair. And I don't know if you can see this, but the last time I saw Bell Hooks was in Puerto Rico at the National Women's Association conference. And she had her hair similar to this. I didn't do this on purpose. I just needed to tease out my hair. And so wash it and, twist it. But I thought, well, should I let it out? No, I'm gonna go with this tonight and honor her beauty and her memory. But she wrote a book called Happy to Be Nappy. This one, I don't know if you know this one. And so before I wrote a paper on my process of what I call decolonizing my hair, this was certainly a huge influence for me. And I guess another huge way that she influences my research is in her discussion about the movement to end violence. So a lot of my research, not with, I always say I didn't go in looking for violence in my data, but the violence was all around me and all around the lives of the women that I research. And so her words, her wisdom around violence in the ways that it's really quite complex. It's not just something that happened to women, but women can also be, can perpetuate that violence. And so pushing us to, to think more deeply about the ways violence impacts our lives and the way that we all play a role in perpetuating it is and continues to be very useful for me. My chapter in the book deals with the intersection of race, place, and space. Bell Hooks, when I think about Bell Hooks, I often think about Zora Neale Hurston's work, especially their eyes were watching, oh God, their eyes were watching God. And how it's so tied to space, right? And Bell Hooks' work in Kentucky around Black Appalachians, that how space influence how we think and are and be has really influenced my current work. I think I'm going to end here because I'm feeling a little fluttered. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Richards.
Hi, everybody. I just want to first say that I am deeply sad. I'm a sociologist. We're sociologists, so I can't romanticize away the fact that Belle died before she was 70 years old. And the tragedy of her not being able to live past the age of 70 does not escape me. It does not escape me that so many Black women work and labor all of their lives, and Black men, and don't get to adequately and appropriately reap the rewards of those days of labor, and that she didn't get to properly be the elder that she deserved to be, and to have enough of us sit at her feet and unadulteratedly pledge our love and devotion to her. The last time I saw Belle was before the pandemic. And she came to Houston because she and I share a relationship with the same friend who she had a crush on. And I always thought that was so, so Belle. She had a crush on him. And I'd be like, he's not good, Belle, he's not good. She came and I was doing a women's program, and she came to speak to the women who were in the program. It was a program for single mothers, which I am, a single mother, single young mother. And we talked about the Beyonce fiasco. And I just want to say this because it really hurt her. The way people attacked her for being truthful about what she thought feminism was and what it wasn't. And it surprised her how many Black women turned against her over the over the Beyonce situation. And I remember telling her that, but we love you, you know, we who know you love you, right? And there is no choice for me, you know. My love for you never waned and could not wane because other people didn't like that you said what you needed to say about Lemonade and that violence was not feminism for you, right? That it was not developed and sophisticated and it wasn't sufficient. But I think about that and I just want to say, I have so much sadness that I didn't write her love letters, you know, that I didn't tell her how much I loved her and how much I appreciated her. And she struggled to get the center going, right? And I just want to be honest because, you know, like she said, people had stopped calling me to know what I cared about, right? That my moment had moved because I was too difficult, right? And I was too unconventional, right? And I didn't fit in enough a narrow box. So I had lost favor. Even though she was appreciative of, you know, the committed people who loved her. And so I think about, you know, for me, I heard someone say where they were when they heard that she passed. You know, I think about that. For me, the passing of Belle was like the assassination of Malcolm or the assassination of Dr. King. What she meant to my life was so grand and so great that her leaving this planet has overwhelmed me and sent me afloat because I don't think she got all the flowers she deserved. And I feel deeply saddened by that in a profound way because she deserved so much more than I think she adequately received. And I met Bell Hooks and I didn't grow up in a feminist family. I grew up in a family where power was balanced by the presence of females. But I grew up in a Black nationalist family. And I, you know, emerged out of Black nationalism. And so I met Bell Hooks when I was in deep mourning about the state of the movement of Black nationalism after the fight for reparations had stalled, the fight for political prisoners, the freeing of Mumia, the exoneration of Assata, you know, when the political prisoner movement had stalled. And I had managed to survive graduate school as a single mother. And I met Bell Hooks in the midst of my own deep trauma from my graduate experience. And in that trauma, trying to mother my son. And Bell Hooks, confronted In Salvation, right? That was probably one of the first reads for me, was Salvation. And so for me, Bell Hooks had a private conversation with me about the key figures in my life through Black nationalism. And she did it in a way that was direct, that was rigorous, but that was done so with a sense of care. And Salvation was like a love letter, right? And nobody had talked about Black people in love, right? As a sociologist, they had talked about us as, dysfunctional families and pathologies. And so for me, Bell Hooks taught me that love was, it was resilient, and it was sincere, and it was rigorous, and it was authentic, and it told the truth, right? And through her writing, she began to challenge me as a mother. And I often would tell her that I'm a former child abuser, right? Because as a mother, I used physical violence against my child. And I started a group for women who were child abusers, right? And that meant that we whipped our children and we confronted what did it mean to be violent against our children in the name of love. And we struggled, and we talked about how hard it was to discipline our male children or female children and to protect them, and what we had learned, and when we would relapse, and we would have these meetings, and I would tell my son, as Bell was his aunt, and he wasn't. That was even why he met Bell in person. I said, well, Bell says, that, this is violent, and this is violence against you, and how do you feel? And, we go in therapy, and I bring the Bell Hooks book into the therapy session with us. And I began the slow path of learning how to love without violence. And it often told her that she saved my son's life. I'd always tell you, I'd say, you saved him, right? Because I wouldn't have killed him physically, but I would have killed him emotionally and spiritually with the violence, right? And I often told her that you were his aunt, that he never, had to talk to, but he could talk through me to you, right? And because she always talked about having an adult, partner, other people to help you parent, a parent figure. And she said it didn't have to be direct. It could be indirect. It just had to be a figure, right? And I made her our figure. And so, she gave me a new way of loving my son. And I'd say, I'm now engaged and life has moved on, and I got new bonus children. And when Bell Hooks died or transitioned, I called my love collaborator and I said, Bell Hooks, I'm crying. And it's like, who? And I was like, remember the definition of love. And so when we met, right, I read him the definition and said, do you agree with this one? Do you agree with that one? And that was like my litmus test, if we could date, if we could be together. Did he understand love was a verb and it needed to be defined? And if he didn't understand, was he open to it? And so, that was the mantra of our relationship. And we go back to Bell when we lose ourselves. And then I'll say finally that, the last time when I was with Bell Hooks, and I think you always say, if you knew it was your last time, what would you have done differently? If I knew it was going to be a pandemic, I would have gone to Kentucky, I would have stopped so much of the activity that I do in my life. But I want to say that the last time we were together, she said to me, she pulled me aside and she said, you have to take time and write, Assata. I know you have all these other things that are important, and they're important, but you owe it to yourself to write. And so I submitted my chapter, and I did it because she told me that I had to write. And she said, I want you to write a memoir, but before you get there, I want you to write the pieces of the memoir at a time and just start writing. And so I only submitted the chapter because I told her that I was going to write. And I told her that, you know, I would find an outlet to start this process of a memoir by writing. And so I owe the fact that I'm even in this publication to her, because she challenged me to be able to put voice to my experiences as a process of healing myself. And I'm so grateful to Bell Hooks that, you know, she was so vulnerable with us. You know, she taught me that I could be strong, but I could be truthful about the places in me that hurt and that ached. And I could critique and analyze the sources of that pain with love and devotion to those people. But I owed it to myself to be truthful and honest about when I have been harmed and when I am harming. And I owe everything that I am at this moment, truly, and it's not an overkill, because Bell Hooks talked with a vulnerability and a authenticness that I had never seen before. And it wasn't in like fifth, ninth person, right? That she pulled back the layers of her life and showed it to me and to us so that we could see that what ached us was not a pathology. It was a set of circumstances and systems and conditions that had created the wound. And it wasn't who we were, but it's what we had endured. And that, you know, was salvation to me. She saved me so that I could save my son. And I now work in cooperative businesses and I provide healing spaces. And my work of my life is to provide and create as many spaces for Black people, particularly Black women, to heal and be restored and to be loved and to care for and committed to, and to be the center of attention and work of repair. Thank you.
It's just taking me a moment. I know. Sick of late. I'm supposed to be next, but just thank you for that, Dr. Richards, in so many ways, and really all of you. I'm mindful of time, so I think this would actually be a good time to pose the last question, and if there's anyone in the audience who wants to answer it, they can, although our speakers are prepared to as well. And really, I mean, the last question is simultaneously small and big, and basically was just, you know, what's one of Bell Hooks's teachings that you want to take with you as you move into the new year that begins in 10 days or something. And I mean, people have been putting great quotes in the chat. And it's hard to like look at one of her books and not just go, yes, this and this and this and this and this and this, or listen to one of her interviews or something. But if there's one that you want to take, that you want to share with the rest, we'll leave some space for a few folks if they want to unmute. You don't have to, I mean, you can just put it in the chat if you want to. But we did just want to give the opportunity for folks who, yeah, you made the time, stuck with it, despite the disruptions that of people who are doing their best to remind us of exactly why we need bell hooks. So if there's anyone out there who wants to raise their hand using the Zoom function, and we'll unmute you.
I'll just start and say that, you know, I had to study nonviolent communication. I mean, you know, because I'm so socialized in violence. But it's really hard not to be angry right now. You know, it's really hard. No, I was just saying that Black people, we just can't catch a break, you know, and with the coronavirus. I thought, okay, you know, some people gonna live, some people gonna die. We gonna get a random, you know, situation. But even with the coronavirus, right, that Black people from book end to book end, right, you know, from the cradle to the grave. And so, you know, very angry at white supremacy. I'm very angry at patriarchy. I'm very angry at the beneficiaries of these systems. And so I keep thinking about this process of grieving as one of transformation. And that's what she was mad about the lemonade, right? Like anger is not feminism, right? It's just mass patriarchy and domination, right? In another package. So I know that I can't sit with anger. So I think this idea of forgiveness and compassion, I was just going to read a quote. For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable, right, for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity, enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And I think that's very difficult, you know, as a Black nationalist for me, which is that I just need to separate myself and get far enough away from you. And you don't have to transform, right? You just need to stop putting your oppression onto me. And that's not enough to save the planet, right? Because we're intricately linked, right? And so we can't even isolate patriarchy and domination. And so for me, I have to always remember and believe that people can be transformed, right? Even if they're in at the nexus of the privilege in which we're fighting against, that transformation is possible. And my job as I do this work is to stay connected to their humanity despite my accountability for their actions, right? And that is to move in the kind of radical love that she spoke about. So right now it's for me to remember compassion and forgiveness are necessary for me to do this work. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? And thank you so very much for all of the comments. I am vacillating between anger and sadness, and I'm moving. It's hard, right, to say, how long can I be angry? Because right now I'm just angry. I'm upset. I'm upset that this is the conditions under which we labor. And then, I mean, it took me out. I think, does it, Dr. Nicole Richards, when you were talking about the fact that she was 69, we can't even live, you know, well into our 80s, 90s, you know, minutes are shaved off of our lives just interacting in the world, you know, engaging with these institutions. It's such an injustice. It's such an injustice. And we, you know, push against these broader structures regularly, you know, be it with, you know, we're sociologists and we're doing research and we're, you know, we're gathering evidence and in an effort to create social change. And you know, we do it in the classroom with our students, and we're carving out these spaces for ourselves to make the change in our, you know, social spheres. I want to know, how long can I be angry? And I don't know, maybe that, you know, and then take that anger, right? Because I know we can't stay there. We can't stay there, but, and then moving that and transforming that into positive, you know, spaces for social change. I feel like I want to rage. You see what I'm saying? I'm very upset that we don't get the opportunities to live out. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think y'all feel me, right? Like, we don't get to live out our full lives and you know, where we have minutes and years shaved off of our lives because we are butting up against and trying to navigate white supremacy on a daily basis. I mean, you all know the research that's out there that talks about, you know, racialized stress being associated with, you know, the inability to even to carry, you know, a child to term and all of these different things, right? High infant mortality rates and high maternal death rates, all of these things. It's just so overwhelming. And she, you know, gave us so much. And I don't really have, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Thank you for allowing and providing this space to speak into the space, even if I'm being relatively incoherent right now. Thank you for allowing me to just share. I think it's important, and I feel all the love. I feel all of the support. And I appreciate you all for just listening and allowing me to kind of ramble on and to be angry, right? Thank you for that.
And I want to say, I don't think there's a right and wrong. The reality is that anger does not sustain life. It doesn't have an energy force strong enough to sustain us to do the work that's necessary for transformation, right? If anger was an adequate frequency, right, then maybe it would be an option, right? But it blindsides us. It makes our view narrow, right? It skews my perception of myself and others. And so Bell is right in the idea that love is the sustaining energy, right? It has the ability to sustain us and so fighting against something is not adequate the same way as fighting for something, right? And that's why, and so it's not to tell people they can't be angry. It's understanding the limitations of anger in terms of what we're trying to build and what we're trying to create, which is why Black feminism is so important, right? Because it's not about what we don't want. And see, this is the problem for sociologists or academics, that we have so much training in what we don't want. We have so much training in the pathology that we don't even spend enough time working on the solution. So even the work that we do, even if it's not anger, is based on what we don't want, right? It's reaffirming the structures and the systems. And so for me, that's why I can't sit with the rage, because it won't sustain me. It won't let me get out of bed, right? It won't let me pick myself up, right? It won't let me move through. It won't let me find any grace. It won't let me survive. It will kill me, just like the oppression kills me, right? And so that's why love is a radical act of self-preservation. And that's why we have to decide, but we can't skip over it, right? So the counter to anger is mourning and grief. See, that's what we don't get to do. They tell us don't be mad, but they don't give us any space to mourn. And we don't take any space, right? That's why I cry in meetings and I just, whenever the mood hits me, I cry. When people say how I'm doing and what I'm doing, I say I'm deeply in grief and mourning. And I tell them why. This is what I'm grieving about today, right? So I no longer even use the mad. I use I'm in deep grief and mourning. That's what I feel. I feel profound, overwhelming grief over what I'm experiencing. And so that's the counter to the rage and the anger piece.
I'll share a little bit that I share with my colleagues on Thursday. We start each of our department meetings with at least 5 minutes of meditation. And I was inspired by some of Belle's words. I led the meditation on Thursday, and I was inspired by Belle's words, which I found that morning. I feel like words come to us when we need them. And this is her essay, New Rituals of Regard, which I believe is in Becoming. In Belonging. And in this passage, she's talking about when she goes back home and taking care of her mother, as her mother has Alzheimer's. And she's reconciling the new rituals that they are co-creating together. And so I'll just share this quote. And it's helping me in this moment to think about, to remember how committed to contemplation and mindfulness Belle was, how committed I am through that mentorship and that guidance, and how mindfulness is rigorous and is work. Belle says about her mother, "It is a joy to sit next to her, to be able to hold her close, to caress her hands, all gestures that would have been impossible in the past. She would have deemed it silly to be sitting around talking of love when there was work to be done. How wonderful it is to have these new experiences with her converge with the old, to see her so tender, so vulnerable, so without the restraints of shame and conventional inhibitions. Now I see her in the wildness of spirit that she once saw in me and wanted to crush it for fear that it was dangerous. My gratitude that I can be present." And so I'm definitely taking into the new year that gift of presence with all of its nuance and all of its wonder. And I'll share that excerpt in the chat.
I just wanted to quickly jump in and thank everybody who joined us today, my co-editor for convening us. I have been moved and moved again. And I am someone like Dr. James, who I felt like I might have came to Black feminism later in life than I wished. But every time I have those sort of thoughts, I'm reminded that it's always there for us whenever we're ready. And so even if I feel like, wow, who would I be if I had this on my bookshelf when I was young? It's true, I have this on my bookshelf, and my sons might be able to read hooks at an early age. And so there's just so much learning that, you know, we can't really put time brackets on it. And so that is what this convening is reminding me of. So thank you very much. I just want to share a quote that I saw from a lot of people after Hooks passed. And I think it's really applicable to what happened today. As my friend Jen Sims reminded us, that she said, "Sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power, not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist." And I am just so glad that all of us are here and existing, and that our legacies can exist beyond us even being here. And so even if they tried to destroy what this event means, it still did exist, and it still has been very powerful. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Whitney, for that. My beloved sister friend who had the pleasure and fun and joy of working, conceptualizing this edited volume and then deciding to, like, in 2 weeks, do it and just take the leap of faith. And I'll just say, you know, community has come up many times. And if you go to the BFS website, we talk a little bit about how this Black Feminist Sociology volume came to be. And there's many threads, but one thing that was really important is that someone, I don't recall who, they might even be here, had started a Facebook group that was for Black women on the tenure track in sociology. And it was called Sisters of the Yam. And I got connected to that group through another contributor to the volume. And she's like, hey, that group is gonna be having a dinner. Whitney Pirtle's organizing that dinner. So find her at the Association for Black Sociologists conference and get connected there. And, you know, it was a group of about 12 of us who were at this dinner, right? Creating community in a space, sociology, a discipline, you know, that wasn't for us per se, but we were going to be together and be in community. And great things happened that night and continue to happen. These folks are here on the screen because of that dinner, that Sisters of the Yam dinner. And I hope, you know, yes, we will follow up with folks who registered and when the video is available and all of that, but want you to keep in mind like that there are all of these people here who are excited to talk about bell hooks and Black feminisms and sociology and love and mindfulness and all the things, right? And there's folks throughout social media, and you don't necessarily have to have a full-on account to be able to just connect with people. And others have put in the chat the sort of altar that the Black Lives Matter for in the schools group has put together. Lisa Covington put that in the chat, and we'll send that out when we do the follow-up as well. And there's all these different ways and different spaces to create community. We do not have to do this alone. And, you know, when I looked back at one of the books, I looked at the inscription that Bell Hooks had put in there, and she'd put, Zakiya, always connect. Like, and that's the answer, you know, like it's just always connecting. So I'm so glad so many of you were able to be in this space, and we hope you will continue to come to BFS events, continue to connect with all of these folks online and other events, and grieve and honor Bell Hooks as much and for as long as you need to, and continue to be with her legacy and embody that legacy. So with that, we're going to close it out, and thank you all so much for being here and helping us process this amazing loss.
Thank you. And can I just say thank you to the hosts. You're busy, you have so much to do. Thank you for doing this work, putting the panel together, making the space, organizing, sending the word out. You know, there was labor that went into this. So thank you for doing that labor. Thank you.
You are all worth that labor. All. Right. Thank you all.
Thank you.